This next video is going to be on compensation and pension exams, more commonly referred to as CMP exams. When you file a claim for disability compensation through the VA is going to have you go ahead and they're going to start scheduling you for things called CMP exams. Now, you could, depending on how many injuries you have and the severity of those injuries, you could have one if not several CMP exams. These are kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole process, and the way I always like to explain it to veterans is when you file a claim for the VA, it's kind of like buying a used car. Before you'd purchase the car, you'd want to go ahead and look under the hood and mess around, kick the tires, and a lot of times you'd bring a mechanic with you when you go ahead and buy a car. CMP exams are the same, basically the same philosophy behind them. After all, if you're going to file for claims for compensation or pension through the VA, the thing is they want the opportunity to look and validate and make sure that your injuries are real, and if they are real, see how severe those injuries are, which is why they're going to go ahead and schedule those appointments. Now, before we get started, I'd like to explain that there's two different types. There's compensation and pension exams. Pension would be for non-service connected injuries, meaning that say you served in the service for 4 or 5 years, you got out of the service, and then 5 years later you got into a car wreck. Well, if you could no longer work, you can always file for a VA pension, but the thing is it's going to be considerably lower because of the fact that it has nothing to do with your service. It can still be useful, but at the same time, the majority of claims that are filed are going to be for the compensation side of things because of the fact that most of injuries are connected to your military service. No matter if it's happened while you're in service, you realize how injured you are after service, or in a lot of Vietnam and Korean War veterans, they don't realize that they're injured till 30, 40, 50 years after their service is ended from exposure to things like Agent Orange. The thing is now that you're going to a CMP, the best advice I always give to people is don't insult people. Don't insult the doctors. You know, you're insulting their intelligence if you try to lie to them or you try to overstate it and put it in terms that it just makes it completely unplausible. You know, there is an entire school of veterans that say, well, you know, if you have a CMP exam, don't shower for a week, don't wash your clothes for a month, grow your beard out for 6 months prior to your CMP exams. Let me tell you, that does nothing. It's not helping you. You know, these CMP doctors, they make a lot of money. They make over $100,000 a year. They're not just doctors. They more or less act as a private investigator in your claim, and yes, they look at the medical side of things, but on top of it, their job is to investigate. And if you think you're going to pull one over on them, you're just not. The thing is if you wear clothes that haven't been washed and you grow your beard out and you don't shower, chances are they're going to be looking at your hands to see if they're manicured. They're going to be looking to see if you have a nice suntan line, to see if you have a nice watch that normally goes there. So the thing is the best defense that you have when going to CMP exams is just go in there and not lie, don't be honest, be brutally honest with them. What you want to do is explain your side of the story in terms that literally gives you the best, puts you in the best position to win your claims. You know, if you go into a CMP exam, I don't suggest that you not take your meds for a month prior to it. No, that's not in your best interest. It's not in your health, and on top of it, they'll see through you. What I tell people is that you want to go ahead and go in there, but don't just tell them how you're feeling at that moment. I want you to stress your injuries and how they normally feel. You know, you can't pick when your pain is on a scale of 1 to 10, when it's a 2 and when it's a 9. But at the same time, if at that exact moment it only feels like a 2 or 3, but on an average it feels like a 9, go ahead and tell them 6 or 7, because that's what you averagely feel like as a disabled vet. Now, when you go in there, one of the things that I always tell people is just be you. You know, the best defense you have with your disabilities is just being yourself. Don't be intimidated by the fact that they're a doctor or a registered nurse or a licensed practitioner. Go ahead and just be you. If you get put in a vulnerable position and you don't like that, because it happens a lot of times when you go to things for, like, say, CMP exams for PTSD, they'll put your chair in the most vulnerable position and they'll expect that you don't move it because of the fact that you're afraid to, or you're worried about dealing with them because they're a doctor. Pick the chair up and move it over, because that's what you would normally do. don't be intimidated by the fact of who they are. The fact is that they're a human being. And the fact is that you're a disabled vet and you don't have to take it from them. You know, don't ever put your hands, don't raise your voice to them, but just go in there and be the most brutally honest disabled vet you can be. You know, I always tell people, so many times I've seen people overshoot their injuries, they undershoot their injuries. You know, when I say undershoot, I mean that a CMP examiner walks out and says, "Hi, how are you doing?" And you look at them and you say, "I'm fine, sir, how are you?" Well, that's not the truth. If that were the truth, you probably wouldn't be in that room at that moment anyway. So you just need to go in there and be the most brutally honest person on the face of this planet and say, you know, if you feel like crap, tell them I feel like crap. I wish I wasn't here. Or I'm breathing. You know, those are things that literally can actually help your claim because of the fact that you're going in there and you're not sitting there playing games with them. Just as many times as I've seen veterans that overstate it and say that they've seen little green Martians, just as many times as that I see veterans say, I'm fine, how are you doing? Because the first thing that examiner is going to do is come into his office and say, patient is fine, clean, well-groomed, smiled, and said he's doing well. Claim denied. That's not going to work out for you. What you need to do is just go in there and be the most brutally honest person on this planet and say, you know what, my life sucks and here's why. Here's what goes on in my life in an average day. Here's what the challenges that I face. This is how my disability stops me from being able to have fun with my family, work a normal job, have an average life, do anything. This is where the problems lie at. See it, people who tell you otherwise, they don't know what they're talking about because of the fact that they'll tell you to overstate it. They don't want it overstated. They just want you to go in there and be absolutely the most brutally honest person on the planet. You know? Well, once they get those CMP exams scheduled, what I would suggest to you is there's a lot of things you can do to go ahead and prepare for it ahead of time. You know, so many vets make the mistake of they get scheduled for CMP exams, they go in and they treat them like just another doctor's appointment. Nothing can be further from the truth than that. When you're going to these CMP exams, you basically they're putting you in the room with the person who's going to be making the decisions on your claim. Granted, they don't have the final say in the decision, but by convincing them, it goes a long way in helping to win your case because you're inside of a room with a medical professional that has the power to say, yes, it is exactly what he's saying, or he or her is saying. And so it really is going to help you out a lot by doing that. Now, before you go to the exam, I would suggest that you go through all of your records ahead of time, maybe a week, 2 weeks before the exam is scheduled. That way you can go ahead and have all the times and dates of when you were injured, when you were treated, what this doctor said, this record, that record. You can be all familiarized again with it, with everything, so that when you go into the examiner's office, you can speak logically and say, look, I was injured in August 13th of 1993, and I received treatment, I was medevac to here, and then this happened and that happened, and you can have it all those times and dates refreshed in your head. Now, after you do that, what I always suggest is that you do a Google of the words Index to Disability Examination Worksheets C&P Exams. I'll say that again. Index to Disability Examination Worksheets C&P Exams. Now, if you put that into a word search, it'll pop up a list on the VA's webpage. Now, then there's about 50 different forms there, and depending on what your injuries are, you can go ahead and look at the questions that are going to be asked during the exams. There's 50 different ones. If you have PTSD, you can pull it up and pull up on your computer exactly what questions the doctor is going to ask. That way you can go ahead and get an idea ahead of time so that when the examination happens, you can go in there and you'll know what's going to be asked ahead of time, and you can go ahead and formulate your answers so that you can maximize what you're trying to tell the doctor. You know, the best thing that you can do throughout the entire CMP process is this. When you go to the CMP examiner's office, don't leave that room until they know without a doubt 100% there is no questions left as to if you're disabled or not and how bad it is. That's some of the best advice I could give, is that you want to just break it down to them, and by knowing what questions are going to be asked ahead of time, you can go ahead and prepare, and on top of it, you can bring your documentation with you to back up everything that you're saying. You know, a lot of people will tell you that when you go to CMPs, they won't accept any records. It doesn't matter. I've got the proof. I've got it sitting right here. If you have any question about it, then we can go ahead and whip it out and I'll show it to you and you can read it yourself. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do in those exams is go ahead and explain it to them in terms that they can understand as to how bad things are going on in your life. Now, one last thing. Normally, during a CMP exam, they're about 5 minutes before the exam is over. Usually there will be a nice little quiet point where there's a moment where the doctor's notating something within the records. What I always suggest to vets is doing this. About 5 minutes before the exam is over, when you have that nice little calm niceness, quiet moment, always just look at the doctor and say, "Excuse me, sir," or "ma'am," depending, and say, "How long will it be until I can file my VA Form 10-5345 so I can get copies of your notes?" Don't do it in a threatening way, just do it exactly like I said. Because what that'll do is it'll let the doctor, the examiner, know ahead of time that this veteran intends to get copies of all the records that I write up. Because at times, I'm going to be honest with you, at times they have a tendency to misstate things, put in false information, or they may just mark something down wrong. Well, by letting them know ahead of time that you're going to be getting copies of all their records, it's going to pretty much sending them a message, maybe I'm not the veteran you want to mess with today, or maybe you want to do your job just that much better today. Because when they know that you're going to go ahead and get copies of everything and then go on top of, go back and read them all, then that tends to let them know that you're also going to be the person who's going to make a big stink if there's something in that file that it shouldn't be there. So just politely say, "Hey, how long do I have to wait before I can file my VA Form 10-5345? Trust me when I tell you, it helps out a lot, because it just puts them on notice that, I'm going to be looking over your shoulder at every turn, so therefore I'm probably not the veteran that you want to mess with today. All right? Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.